Lawyers of Reddit, what was your oh crap moment in court? Sat in on a personal injury case where the plaintiff broke their leg in an accident and had a doctor on the stand as an expert. The woman's lawyer begins questioning the doctor about their experience with leg injuries. He was a well-known orthopedic surgeon in the area. She asks if he's ever treated a tibial fracture. The leg bones are tibia and fibula, to which he only answers no. Then she starts grilling him with questions about the tibula. After about 6-7 questions she asks, how did you get a medical license and have been able to practice medicine this long if you've never treated a tibial fracture, and begins a small rant about going after his credentials and those that gave it to him. To which he simply responds, there is no bone named the tibula. The lawyer became beet red and everyone in the room tried their best to keep from laughing, including the judge. Oh god, I can feel the second-hand embarrassment. I was representing a plaintiff in a hit-and-run case. Plaintiff is testifying and is, despite me preparing them for several hours the previous day, an absolutely terrible witness for her own case. Like, she couldn't even identify the street she was crossing when she was hit by the car. It was a major highway and we had gone through the sequence of events countless times the day before the hearing. The oh crap moment came during cross-examination. Defense counsel pulls out a picture of my client dressed up and ready to hit the club, which was posted to Facebook the day after the alleged accident. I, thinking quickly, object because the timestamp refers to when it was posted, not when it was taken. Defense counsel showed the picture to my client and asked her when the picture was taken. Sure enough, they say it was taken the day after the accident when she was supposedly in unbearable pain. Oh, crap. Not your fault. Good thing it happened too. It means justice is served. When I was in college, I was a bailiff. Guy is on trial for murder. First witness testified that she saw the defendant shoot the victim. Second witness states the same. Police officer testimony is that he arrived at the scene and defendant was there holding the gun. Coroner testimony is that the first bullet hit the victim in the arm, the second bullet hit the victim in the torso, and the third bullet hit the victim in the heart, which was the fatal shot. Defendant yells out, see, that proves that I didn't kill him. I only shot the mother sucker twice. I was a baby lawyer in my first year representing the 19-year-old child of some rich people in San Mateo County, CA. My client had gone on a bit of a shoplifting spree and we were cleaning all her cases up with a global plea, meaning we handled them all at once. Being new, I filled out the plea form wrong, swapping the counts she was charged with for the counts she was pleading to. It's an easy mistake to make. Every court has their own unique form and I was unfamiliar with San Mateo's. The judge calls my line, starts reading off the plea form, notices the mistake and then starts screaming at the top of his lungs, counsel, what is this? What is this? Is this your first day on the job? This is a court of law and we do not accept mistakes. Fill this plea form out correctly or I will have you taken into custody for contempt. I did not expect a reaction like that. My client, who had clearly just taken a huge bong rip at 8 AM and who was wearing an all pink velvet tracksuit, was looking at me like I was the biggest idiot in the world. I corrected the plea form. The judge made me wait until the very end of the calendar to take my plea. Afterward, he called me up to the bench. In private he told me, sorry to ream you like that. Everyone messes the plea form up, so I always pick the youngest lawyer to yell at. The elder guys will grumble and complain. But if you notice, they all fixed their own forms and we didn't have any more problems. Keeps the calendar running smooth. Where did you go to law school? After that he invited me into his office for coffee and gave me some really good life work advice. Turns out he likes talking to new lawyers. TLDR. Judge loses his crap in court over a simple mistake. Turns out it was all a show for the other lawyers and I have one of the worst best court experiences of my early career. I am stupid. I 1000% initially thought baby lawyer meant that you were a lawyer that represented babies. Represented a woman charged with multiple very serious felonies. She insisted that in the months before the offense, she'd been seriously dating one of the detectives who ultimately wound up investigating and testifying in her case. For a variety of reasons, I trusted this client and believed her, even though the detective never disclosed the relationship in his report. So, during his testimony, I asked Detective Smith, you had a romantic relationship with Ms. Defendant, correct? He goes, what? No, and is visibly offended. The judge looks at me like I've lost my mind. The Commonwealth attorney audibly says, "What?" I'm freaking out because a large part of my cross and argument was focused on the bias formed by the prior relationship. And now I've got nothing and I've lost all credibility. I try again. Detective Smith, have you had a physical relationship with Ms. Defendant? As the Commonwealth rises to object and the judge starts to scold me, the detective goes, "Oh, yay. We've had fricked. It just wasn't very romantic. State is Virginia." The jury acquitted my client of the relatively minor charge that the detective in my story was involved with, but convicted of the other, much more serious charges that detective had nothing to do with. There was a confession and video on the serious charges, so it was kind of a no-brainer. Sorry, I'm being kind of intentionally vague. There are no confidentiality concerns, since this all happened in open court, but it's distasteful to give out too much information about a client. The detective was not disqualified. His testimony was not thrown out. Impeachment, no matter how good, doesn't result in you getting to throw out a witness's testimony entirely. By the way, it wasn't really the sex that was the issue. It was that he didn't disclose it to anyone and his repeated insistence under questioning that he didn't disclose it because it was irrelevant. Like Watergate, it's not the crime, it's the cover-up that gets you. But I don't get to demand the judge throw out the testimony or that charge just because the cop failed to disclose a prior relationship with the defendant. I just get to point it out, argue it in closing, and then hope the jury also sees the relevance. Oh, you mean the freaking? Yes, there was that. UK, bear with me on this one. I was in court listening to the most boring old defense lawyer you've ever seen. He was questioning the arresting officer in the case. It was drugs or something like that. Anyway, he's droning on about every little detail and the magistrate was constantly telling him to hurry along. The arresting officer was getting noticeably annoyed and the room became empty pretty quick. Everyone was very bored and annoyed. He was droning about details that I'm not sure anyone was really listening to or cared about. Anyway, he went over arrest times and the likes with the officer. Time he admitted the suspect and released him. He had bored the officer to the point where he was barely paying attention. So he was admitted in at 21:45 on the night in question. Yes, and released the night after. Yes, and that was what? Just after 10 PM. Yes, what time after 10? I don't know. 10:15 maybe. So my client was detained for more than 24 hours. Wait. The penny dropped. The officer let his guard down and had revealed he kept the defendant for more than 24 hours, which is the max time for detention in the UK. The defense rested and the magistrate threw the case out immediately. Well played, sir. Well played. It wasn't me that was the lawyer. Got called for jury duty. Was at the jury selection phase, and they asked if anyone here thinks they should not. Blah blah. Defendant was in the room. I raised my hand. The defending lawyer looked at me like, "Oh, this ought to be good," and asked me to explain. I suggested I tell them in private. He insisted I tell the courtroom. I said, "Okay, I probably shouldn't be on this jury because I was on a previous jury for this man which returned a guilty verdict." Lawyer's face went, "Oh crap." Commotion and a wait while they looked up records. Yep, verified. Whole jury was now tainted. Everyone goes home, and they start over. It sounds like you saved yourself quite a tongue lashing by suggesting that it be in private. I was interning for a judge. We were in the middle of voir dire for what was frankly not that exciting of a criminal case. Half-day trial expected. Not salacious details or violence or anything. 75 potential jurors in the room. And when my judge didn't let a guy out of jury duty because he'd have to pick up his kids, that guy proceeded to say in front of everyone that if he was made to show up next week he'd make it the shortest trial ever and find him guilty right out of the gate. My judge was an incredibly even-keel guy. Nothing shook him or got to rise out of him. And he was an expert at figuring out what he wanted to say in the most neutral fashion possible before he said it. Conversations with him took forever because there was a pause before every sentence. But then, this guy poisons an entire jury pool of 75 people. We had to individually question each person to see if that little outburst was going to affect their impartiality, etc. 75 in-camera interviews later, judge pulls the guy back in front of everybody and begins to scream at him about disrespecting him, the courts, and every other juror's time. Me, the attorneys, and the court reporter go white-face because we didn't know this was coming. The guy didn't have to sit for jury duty, but I still don't know if he got to pick his kids up, since he spent a couple days in jail for contempt. This is probably why the couple jury selections I've been in, they dismissed everyone at the first hint that person seemed like they didn't want to be there, including the guy who sighed loudly then walked shaking his head to the jury box when his name was called. Judge instantly moved for his dismissal. I was involved in a pretty messy custody case. The other party was a mess and had kept the child from my client for a few weeks. OP was playing lots of stupid games and kept requesting continuances. I requested a drug test, which the judge ordered. However, the OP didn't show up for it. To clarify, he did show up. He just stood in front of the toilet for literally 2 hours and claimed he couldn't pee. I was representing the plaintiff, so the burden was on me. I called multiple witnesses that testified to the defendant's drug use. So, opposing counsel decides to call their client for direct examination and asks, "You don't use H and crack, right?" That is, for the non-lawyers, a very stupid question for many reasons, especially considering his client didn't show up for his drug test. However, I fully expected the defendant to just lie and say he was clean. After the question was asked, there was a really long pause and the defendant said, "Yes, I do both of those drugs." My head almost exploded. I didn't ask any questions on cross-examination because I didn't want to muddy the waters. I won, and the child is doing great. I genuinely don't understand how people are this stupid. Not mine, but my boss's one. She had to defend a small-time delinquent as duty solicitor. Before going to court, he asked her what he should do. She explained to him if he was cooperative and truthful, his sentence would be milder. After hearing the case, the judge asked him if he wanted to add something. He got up and explained to the judge, "My counsel told me to be truthful, so I wanted to tell you that I not only did the robbery I'm being heard for, but also several others in the region." He continued to admit to several robberies that had been unsolved yet, and everyone, even the state attorney, were facepalming. I suspect the truth did not set him free. Mine actually happened while I was sitting in the jury pool during voir dire. The case was a double homicide, and the jury pool filled the entire courtroom. If you're not familiar with voir dire, it is when the lawyers ask the potential jurors questions to determine who they want to sit on the jury and who they want to exclude. It is a long and boring process for almost everyone involved, but 9/10 it's the most important stage in a case. So the lawyers are asking us questions, and if that question applied to you, you raised your hand and they handed you a microphone to answer the question. The question asked was, do you or anyone you know have prior knowledge of this case? So this older gentleman raised his hand, is handed the mic, and proceeds to say, "Yeah, I work at a police station as a janitor, and I heard 2 detectives talking about him," points to defendant, "and they were saying he was about as guilty as sin." We all kind of stared open-mouthed at this guy, and I started chuckling because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Naturally, the defense attorney asked to approach the bench, followed quickly by the state prosecutor. After some quick and energetic whispering, the judge addressed the man. "Do you realize what you just did? You potentially poisoned this entire jury pool. I will be calling your boss and you will be hearing about this. You can count on that. You are dismissed, sir. But this isn't over." The man was escorted out, and then the judge addressed the remaining jury pool, which was still in a mostly packed room. "Now I want you all to disregard what that man just said. I'm sure if any of you were ever accused of a crime like this, you would want a fair trial, and not be condemned based on the words of one old man. I have been in court many times since, but never have I seen that level of downright jaw-dropping absurdity again." Literally the first thing I ever did was just a law student intern. Guy has a legit defense on a drug possession case. Drugs found in a jacket. Guy wasn't wearing jacket. They were going to have a very difficult time proving the jacket belonged to my guy. Had a long meeting with client. Explained everything. Client was excited. Day of the preliminary hearing. Guy shows up and sits down directly in front of the officer who arrested him, while wearing the jacket in question. The exact same jacket we were going to say they couldn't prove belonged to him. Not in court, but at a tribunal. And also I was plaintiff, suing for wrongful termination. My rep: "So you terminated him because he was ill?" Employer: "Yes. Mister, And he was ill because he is disabled. Employer: yes. Mr. So you fired someone for being disabled? Employer: yes. Was in court for a directions hearing. The judge was already in a bad mood and asked why we were here for such a seemingly pointless litigation, without giving details. He was right. The barrister starts to make our case, and I am taking notes about areas we need to further explore when I hear, "Excuse me, why were you so rude to me?" The client, who had been told to not come, had come to court that day and was evidently incensed by the judge questioning the merit of their case. They berated the judge for about 3 minutes, with me and my co-counsel first stunned and then trying to shut them up, before he adjourned the hearing. The case did not go very well, to my client's surprise and fury. Big sigh. Ahahahaha. Those are always the ones who are totally shocked when it doesn't go their way. Not me, but my former law partner. She was in court representing a client, I think in a hearing for a restraining order against her soon-to-be ex-husband. Our client was telling the judge that when they met to exchange the children for visitation, the ex had kicked her. He immediately angrily shouted, "She can't prove it, I didn't leave a mark, thanks, buddy." There was something like this on Judge Judy when she was asking the plaintiff about items stolen from her bag. The defendant quickly jumped in and said something in particular wasn't in said bag. Busted. Probably the funniest one I ever came across happened to a colleague. We were prosecutors then. 18-year-old defendant applying for bail. He needed a residential address and got his dad to show up at court to confirm that the family home was available to him. Defense lawyer gets old dad to confirm that son can stay at family home. Dad says yes. My fellow prosecutor gets up and asks dad, "Do you really want him home?" Dad goes off the deep end. Jesus. The grief he's brought me and his mother. Out all hours. Taking drugs. Hiding stolen property in the garage. All-night parties. I'm on antidepressants and the wife's had a nervous breakdown. Dad goes off on one for 5 solid minutes. As the defendant gets taken back to the cells, he calls out, "Thanks dad. I owe you one." 2 moments in a DUI trial. 1. Passenger is testifying for driver's sobriety when the DA asks her, "You keep saying he was sober, but are you even tip certified?" A court for bartenders so they can recognize drunk patrons she was. 2. The head of the county's blood lab accidentally admitted he cranked the sensitivity of his machines way up because he was experimenting. On 2. Thanks, Krieger. Obligatory anal. But in a pre-mediation meeting once for an uninsured motorist claim, an insured had alleged that she couldn't walk without the aid of a cane and had a pronounced limp after an accident due to a low back injury and a shooting pain in her right leg. The doctor notes didn't support anything but a subjective injury after a few weeks, but she was still treating 2 years later and going to new physicians. So, we had her followed covertly to see if she was really using the cane and had a limp, etc. We got footage of her carrying like 4 grocery bags in each arm to her car in a Walmart parking lot, walking perfectly fine. When she got to her car, she even opened the trunk of her SUV without putting any bags down and lifted the gate with her knee partway. Her elderly mother was with her using a particularly decorative purple cane with a flower pattern on it. They followed her to a doctor appointment an hour later and she's on video using her mother's cane and walking with a limp that would give Forrest Gump a run for his money. Never did follow up on how that played in the mediation, but I can only imagine it gave some attorney an oh crap moment. My grandfather was a pie. It's amazing how freaking dumb people are when it comes to insurance fraud. Person I was representing was on trial for assault in the 3rd degree and DUI. In my state, A3 means you've assaulted an aid worker or police officer and is a felony. The allegations are that he was very verbally abusive to the officers and, at one point, kicked one in the face. We're sitting at the defendant's table and the officer is testifying about the statements my guy made to him, including some pretty horrific name calling. Out of nowhere, my client screams, "You're freaking liar, frick you, you son of a b." We lost the trial. Another time, the judge asked a client whether anyone had coerced him into pleading guilty, and he said yeah, my attorney. I about crapped my pants, but he laughed and said, "I'm joking." Number. Not a lawyer, but a defendant. As a teenager, I got busted with a couple of buddies throwing eggs at cars. We were only actually in the courtroom for our sentencing. There was no trial. The judge called each of us up individually to ask us if we had anything to say. One of my friends tells the judge that he is a good kid who doesn't normally do things like this. Lie. We used to do it all the time. And that I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. I wish there was a video of my other friend and I sitting in the benches watching this happen. We simultaneously dropped our heads into our hands because we couldn't believe that idiot just said that. The judge was not pleased, and she took the opportunity to remind him that going to a store, buying eggs, going to another location across town, and then throwing those eggs at cars was not just being in the wrong place at the wrong time. I am sorry, Your Honor. I didn't know I couldn't do that. I'm not a lawyer, but I was a character witness for my childhood dog in a civil trial between our neighbors and my parents. Opposing counsel was questioning me. I wasn't even out of elementary school at the time, and he asked if our dog was aggressive. She was a Rottweiler and very loving and incredibly protective of me and my siblings. His final question to me is one I will never forget. He asked, "Did your father tell you what to say before you came into court today?" I responded yes. Then he asked, "What did he tell you to say?" I said the truth. Now I was too young to remember the courtroom reaction, but according to my father, the judge audibly guffawed and the opposing counsel lost all the wind out of his sails. Character witness for my dog has me smiling. They're so loyal to us. We should return the favor. I was at a hearing arguing that my client was wrongfully terminated because the employer failed to abide by the proper procedures. During the hearing, a witness for the employer tried to offer documents that were fraudulently altered in order to make it look like the proper procedure was followed. I noticed the alteration. Opposing counsel quickly got that witness out of the room, and after a quick adjournment, my client got a large settlement. As a law student, we were allowed to make court appearances under the supervision of an assistant district attorney. I was doing arraignments and my aider said, "Don't talk to the judge unless he asks you a specific question." So the judge and the defense attorney were going back and forth about when the next court date would be. The judge wanted a specific date, let's say 4/20. The defense attorney was adamant that she couldn't do that date. In my file, I had a calendar with a big X over 4/20 saying "do not schedule." The judge and defense attorney go back and forth for several minutes. The judge wanted 4/20 and the defense attorney saying no. I was keeping my mouth shut because the judge hadn't asked me directly. Finally, the defense attorney relents and agrees to 4/20. The judge turns to me and says, "Do the people agree with 4/20?" At which point I say, "Sorry, Your Honor, but we cannot schedule for 4/20. The judge looked at me for a second and then just ripped into me, "Mr. Jones 1, you just heard me and the defense go back and forth for several minutes about a date you knew the people couldn't do. Do you like wasting the court's time?" It went on like that for a few minutes, him just berating me in front of about 200 people in a court in Brooklyn. Finally, after me apologizing profusely and him giving me a withering glare, we moved on and went to the next case. At the next break, the judge said, "Mr. Jones 1, please approach the bench." I thought I was really in for it then. I walked up beside the bench. The judge came down to talk to me and said with a big smile, "Don't worry about it. I was just giving you a hard time. Welcome to Brooklyn Criminal Court." Opposing counsel was a nightmare. Everything late. His work was extremely subpar, and so forth. Accused me of lying multiple times when he had dropped the ball. During another hearing in which he did another dumb move, judge says, "I'm glad you are the last case on the call, and all of the other attorneys have left the room, so they aren't here to hear me say that you are a terrible attorney." Medical malpractice defense lawyer here representing hospitals, doctors. This was not my oh crap moment but plaintiff's oh crap moment. For context, usually at trial, both plaintiff and defendant will have an expert physician testify as to their opinion to whether the doctor hospital performed everything correctly. I thoroughly researched plaintiff's expert, who was an OB-GYN, baby delivery, and found out he had been suspended a number of times for his own botched deliveries and giving incorrect medical testimony to help plaintiff's cases. During the actual day of trial, turns out he was not licensed to practice medicine independently without supervision from another physician, and he was 1 year into his 3-year suspension. Plaintiff's lawyers had no idea about their own expert's background and they just sat there with a blank look on their face. Needless to say, during cross-examination, we destroyed his credibility and won at trial. Lawyers of Reddit, what is the nastiest, craziest divorce case that you've handled? I worked for a judge. 2 prominent local news people had a divorce. They filed mutual restraining orders against each other for violence. The filings were vague on details, but still somehow conveyed a sense of Shiloh or Antietam levels of blood. When it came time for the hearing, it turned out the violence was spitting. More specifically, during a heated argument, flecks of spittle managed to touch the other party. Judge denied the restraining orders, and both parties' attorneys probably bought new yachts, such as Justice. Man, if they were both on TV at this time, you think their lawyers would have advised this is a bad idea. You were on screen the next day with no visible injuries, it's not going to go your way. Here's a story of a potential thwarted divorce case, told to me by our closing attorney. The man and his fiancée are buying a house together. They get to the paper where you sign off on all your aliases. The woman has a full page of former names. The guy asks, "What is this?" The woman nonchalantly says, "Oh, I've been married 5 times before." The guy gets up and walks out. Needless to say, they did not buy the house or stay together. You'd think that had come up before the setting down hundreds of thousands of dollars together phase of a relationship. I'm a child who dealt with parents getting divorced. When I was 7, I was forced to go to therapists to play games with them. My mother was trying to get custody and insisted it was a board game. It seemed innocent enough. I roll the dice, and the therapist picks up a card from his deck and asks me a question. When he rolled, I picked a card and asked him a question. My questions were simple for a 7-year-old. What's your favorite color? And whatnot. His questions were smart, tricky. How do you feel when mommy does this? And what do you think of daddy when this happens? So I sat there for an hour, 7 years old, playing this game. At the end, we left the room and met with my parents, and he said I would do better living with my mother. I specifically remember looking at the man and saying, "But I don't want to just live with mom. I want to live with dad too. Like I'm doing now. 1 week at mom's, 1 week at dad's." I'll never forget the way that the therapist basically ignored me and said that the game discussions showed that I'm happier with my mom. The look on my father's face was heartbreaking and he started to tear up. I remember as we were walking out of the place, my parents stopped in the parking lot to discuss things, and I stood there waiting for them to finish arguing. I remember getting so frustrated because they were talking about me in front of me. I stopped them and said, "Why didn't you just ask me what I wanted?" My mother looked quite stunned, and my dad seemed so relieved. I wound up doing 1 week at mom's and 1 week at dad's until I was 17 and went into college. Mondays I got on the bus at one house and off the bus at the other. Parents, don't be dongs. Just ask your kid. We might actually have something to say. I had a few. One guy had his wife served with the divorce papers while she was in the hospital undergoing cancer treatment. She had no idea he wanted a divorce. One guy wanted a provision in his divorce that said his sons couldn't watch NASCAR because the wife's new boyfriend was into NASCAR. In the same case, the property division was so contentious that the judge had the parties list every piece of furniture in the house and try to work through who would get what. The guy made sure that he wanted everything she did, down to things like lace doilies her grandma made and some trophy she won in a women's shooting competition. I bought her the gun, so it's pretty much my trophy. Another guy wanted no custody and no visitation with his 4 sons until he learned how much child support would be. Then he wanted full custody with no visitation for the wife and the hope that she'd have to pay him child support. I only did divorces for about a year before I moved on to mortgage foreclosures. Those are far less depressing. I was a secretary for an attorney. I think the most entertaining one was when a guy had to divorce his wife via newspaper because she wouldn't leave the house or answer the door for the process server. My parents' divorce was finalized September of 2014, but the separation of assets is still opened. The short of it is that my dad has always been really jealous. About 2 years ago, my dad got it in his head that my mom was cheating with a Baco police officer in our hometown, Mexico. He hired 2 guys to watch her 24/7. They confirmed that she was cheating and said they had a video. Well, $8K and my dad's sanity later. There's no video and my dad is mentally ill. He hired someone else to kill this Baco police officer. Thankfully they too just took his money and did not kill him. He started going to brothels and sexually harassing women. He said he would leave my mom on the streets and has attempted to pay off judges. My dad was always a good hard-working man. Now he is someone I don't know. Some say it's a midlife crisis, but the guy is 65 years old. I feel if it was a crisis it should have happened years ago. TLDR. My dad thinks he lives in Colombian novella. That's terrible and I feel awful for you, but it's possible your dad needs medical help. I'm no expert, but I've heard stories of people with family members around his age who underwent sudden personality changes, and it turned out to be early onset dementia, a tumor, or some other issue. The hard part is convincing him he needs care. I didn't handle the divorce, but I was working in a legal clinic and had a client seeking a protective order from her ex-husband. We had an initial interview and I got paperwork filed. Between filing and the scheduled hearing, she called me. She started rambling and when she calmed down, she told me her ex had been arrested for murdering his brother. Even with bigger fish to fry, he insisted on attending the protective order hearing while in custody, which is his right but a terrible idea because anything he says on the record can be used by prosecutors. He shows up in his prison jumpsuit and handcuffs and takes every opportunity to talk about how my client would get drunk and start fights with him and he had to give her a slap to shut her up. He's currently serving a life sentence after being convicted of second-degree murder and several other felonies. Divorce attorney here. The standard comment I make is that I represent good people in their worst moments. However, some cases seem like representing the worst people in their worst moments. I have a bunch of anecdotes, but the truly surreal case for me was a post-decree case was a husband sought reduction of his unallocated family support obligation after he was fired from a six-figure salary as a public school principal. He was jerking off in his car while driving and was observed by most of the people in a school bus that was much higher than his car. The legal issue was whether his change in employment was in bad faith. After a 3-hour hearing, court felt that it was. He was jerking off in his car while driving and was observed by most of the people in a school bus that was much higher than his car. The legal issue was whether his change in employment was in bad faith. After a 3-hour hearing, court felt that it was. I agree. Most people know not to have a wank on school property, unless they are a student of course. My grandparents' divorce. I refused to help them with it or get involved. I think my only advice was to burn all of their possessions. It was truly awful. It went on for at least 4 years. My grandfather was a shopping addict and hoarder and step-grandmother left the minute that they ran out of cash. They then proceeded to fight about every object in their hoard all while both being in the middle of dying. She was dying of cancer and Alzheimer's and he of diabetes and kidney failure. So it wasn't like they had some grand plan about how someone was going to use any of these objects. They owned basically nothing of actual value. My grandfather was just awful and wouldn't let her go. Did she know she was leaving? Not sure, and wrote her nasty letters weekly. After my grandfather died, my family threw away or donated virtually every last hammer, hat and book they fought over. What a waste of time and energy their whole divorce fiasco was. I'm sure they greatly annoyed their respective attorneys greatly. Far back on Reddit I saw a thread where the guy lost his house in the divorce but kept few land around it via some loophole. First he had all the trees logged and sold, then he had the stumps ground and mulched, then he sold the topsoil, he sold off the gravel, then he sold off the clay until the house was left on a hill surrounded by rock. If someone knows the thread please link it, it's great. I just had lunch with a lawyer friend of mine and he told me this crazy story. When he was an intern there was this divorce case where the woman was demanding her husband for child support. It was in a small city in Bolivia's highlands and both the husband and wife were shepherds. Anyways, the husband asked the judge for a medical examination of his genitalia. Turns out the husband was actually a woman. She was raised by her grandparents and they respected her preferences. For the rest of the community she was a boy. After her grandparents died she inherited the land and after some time the neighbor offered her to marry his daughter. Without knowing the guy was actually a girl. She accepted and once she was married she came to an agreement with her wife. They will be married but they won't have sex. After a while the wife got a lover and had 3 kids. The husband took them as his own. Some years passed and the relationship got really deteriorated so the husband asked for a divorce. Things got ugly and she ended up telling the truth in order to avoid paying child support. That was a ride. My mum and dad's case was a giant head frick for me. The custody battle was just bad. I'm pretty sure my mum has a mental illness. She accused my dad of molesting me. Not true. So when they split, the court gave her custody. She had 2 other kids, both with different fathers, living with their fathers. For a reason. She was a druggy alcoholic prostitute. I got to visit my dad sometimes, but he had to always have a witness with him, and my mum would never be home half the time for him to pick me up. To this day I have no idea where she would have taken me. I suspect a dealer's place or a so-called boyfriend's place. So one day dad was going to take me to the zoo. We met at the train station and my mum then decided to argue and say I wasn't allowed to go. So 4-year-old me must have thought "nah frick you be," and I spat in her face. Dad was so proud. But he sorta told me off because he was actually a responsible parent. Eventually the court realized that this woman was in fact not capable of raising any of her children and was a train wreck. So the tables turned and dad had custody and I was to see her every so often. Any visitations were monitored by a social worker. She kinda disappeared for a few years though, and I eventually forgot what she looked like. A lot of my childhood memories have mostly been suppressed and forgotten. Eventually I asked if I could see my mum again. Court order was to see her every second weekend. Started off alright, but history began to repeat itself and I was exposed to a lot of violence during my teens. Not quite a divorce case, but it was close to being so. My dad did love my mum and was going to ask her to marry him. Lucky he didn't before that all happened. Not strictly divorces, but my family law professor had some good stories. Story 1. Client calls. "Hi. Can I kick my pregnant girlfriend out of the house? You really shouldn't do that. But can I? Legally speaking? Since you never married, and the home is in your name, yes, you can legally exclude her, but you really freaking shouldn't. Thanks, I need you to explain that to someone." Client opens door, where police are getting ready with a ram. Hand cell phone to police officer. Story 2. Unmarried mum comes in and asks, "So, what do I have to do to get his house?" You really shouldn't be getting married if you're already planning to end the relationship. Yeah, but what do I have to do? Well, if you're married and live in the home, it become a matrimonial home and you have an equal right to possession upon divorce. Thanks. Client calls again. He wants me to sign a prenup. Well, this would limit what you would be able to get in a divorce, and it doesn't really give you anything. Why are you getting married if both you and he know that you're only in it to get his house? Okay, so I should sign it. Client calls again. Okay, we are married now, but he won't let me move in. Family law is crazy. A guest speaker in that course was beaten up by thugs for a ruling he made in a high-profile arbitration case. A man came into the family law firm my friend was working in and says his wife was cheating on him. He's extremely rich and wants to get divorced. The lawyer proceeds to ask him about his assets and what he wants to keep. He says that she can have the house, the car, the boat, the kids, etc. The lawyer asks him what he wants to keep then, given that he doesn't seem to want anything. The man angrily responds that B only loves her dog. I want her to suffer, so I want the court to order that the dog be taken away from her and cremated. She can have 50% of the ashes and I'll have the other 50%. Somehow this prince among men is getting divorced. And despite the crazy, somehow I'm still interested in practicing in family law. Not a lawyer, but saw what happened to my cousin. He got married at the start one year. During the year ended up needing surgery. Gets home and wife has left and taken all the stuff including the dog. They both owned a house each, but his was worth slightly more, so she made him pay her the difference in the settlement. But as a happy end to the story, he's now married to a lovely woman and they have 2 kids together. Someone in my family holds the state record for longest divorce proceedings. 30+ years of unrelenting fighting that divided the family into who talks to which parent, complete with long periods of not speaking to one another and family members not speaking to the people who won't speak to the family members that they like. The reverse too. Some people talk to the mom and some talk to the dad, but you can't talk to them both. Not allowed. God forbid you ever mention one to the other. It's a war and it totally fricked their kids, my mom and aunts, uncles. Up, it won't end until both parties are dead and in the ground. Getting my counseling license and taking legal ethics classes. One crazy story is while a lady is in her counseling session, Her husband comes in and says to the receptionist that he's her husband and he won't be able to pick up the kids because he has to go into work right then, and could the receptionist let the client know when she gets out of the appointment? The receptionist says yes. When the client comes out of her appointment, the receptionist passes along the message and the client says, "Are you serious? He isn't supposed to know I'm here. We're in the middle of a divorce and he's crazy." TLDR. Train receptionists to say I can neither confirm or deny that person is a client. Not an attorney, but I do title research, and including divorce cases in reports is part of my job. I came across a case in Ohio from the early 1900s in which the wife jabbed her husband in the rectum with a hot poker, made him sleep in the barn for several months, had his sons beat the crap out of him, and she still got the farm in the divorce. Her defense was that he was a drunk, which was enough for the judge, apparently. Before you testify to crap in any civil suit, bear in mind that it's public record and some butthole like me is gonna come along 100 years later and laugh at your butt, so to speak. I know that was 115 years ago, but that abuse sounds horrific and I hope he is safe in heaven. I work in civil litigation, so not divorce, but I had a case where part of the issue was the previous dangerous behavior of plaintiff's dogs. My client believed that part of plaintiff's divorce involved not allowing the dogs around plaintiff's kids, so we filed to unseal the divorce settlement agreement. The divorce was between two lawyers and it was a doozy of a settlement. They had 2 single-space pages dedicated to splitting up family stuffed animals. It was pretty heartbreaking to read who would be getting things like Boots the bear. Oh dear God, I can't even begin to imagine. I've seen theater couples try to act together. I've seen tech couples try to program together. But holy crap, 2 lawyers trying to rip their respective lives back apart. I'd imagine there have been multinational wars with less collateral damage. My sister works at a family law firm. Some lady was divorcing her husband, and after the mediation he called back the next day saying he was going to kill her and everyone at the firm. So I'd say he handled it well. He sounds like a catch. I wonder why she wanted to divorce him. Yes, finally my moments to shine. A mother US citizen who took her child from Argentina and ran back to the US child born in AR. I represented the Argentine father husband. Federal court, Argentine govt got involved, made the news in Buenos Aires. We won and had child returned to father in Argentina. Also represented a woman who was convinced that her husband had implanted micro robots into her brain and was trying to control her. She would bring us all these nanotech articles trying to convince us that it was possible. She dragged the case out for 4 years, convinced that he has done all kinds of illegal stuff, like destroyed her car brakes so she would crash and putting poison into her tap water. She was nuts. We almost had to get a conservator for her estate. My first divorce case was the most memorable. My client was a nice looking, 50-ish waitress who was breaking hearts at the local small town cafe. She was on divorce number 5. I had a little lawyer kit of things she should do: clean out the joint accounts, change the car title, etc. She had done all of them, plus a few things neither I nor the professional list maker had thought of. Husband number 5 came into my office to cry and concede everything. Now that was a guy who needed a lawyer with a list. No such luck. She fricked him over gently, professionally, I thought. Didn't overreach too much, but got everything she was or might have been entitled to, plus a little more. It was easy peasy for me. Helps if your first time is with an experienced woman. I learned a lot. Helps if your first time is with an experienced woman. I learned a lot. I find this is true about a lot of things. Day 58 of the 60 days it took for my parents' divorce to be final. My dad called my mom at work and begged her to call it off and take him back. She said no. He went from sad and crying to pee, saying, "So this is how you want things." About an hour and a half later, my mom got another phone call from someone letting her know that our house was on fire. It was arson, of course. I wish that's the worst I could say about their divorce. Sounds like she was right to divorce him. My sister is a divorce lawyer and I remember she once told me about a case she handled where the wife kept cheating on the husband with younger dudes, and one day the husband had enough and decided to beat her repeatedly and sent her to the hospital. What a story, Mark. Not a lawyer, but I'm sure the divorce lawyers for my parents could write a lot. Both my parents are stubborn and often irrational. For example, my dad accused my mom of being a negligent parent for giving me chocolate chip cookies. My mom accused my dad of breaking into her house to replace my antidepressants with sugar pills. I had a weird childhood. I wonder why you were taking antidepressants. It sounds like such a wonderful childhood. I worked on a case where the other party's statement of property listed every individual food item in the house at the date of separation. Campbell's condensed tomato soup, $0.59. I was a family law attorney for years. It is nasty all the time, which is why I finally switched to a different area. Nasty. One parental alienation cases just make you want to hurt someone. Those poor kids are brainwashed. It is beyond cruel. Had one where the little kid was so brainwashed she would scream at the top of her lungs if she even saw a picture of the other parent. Everyone knew she was brainwashed, but the options are few when the kid is so fricked up. Are you really going to force the kid to live with a parent they hate? These cases frick you up. 2 had several where dad didn't give a frick about ever seeing his kids, but grandmother wanted him to get some custody out of principle and was bankrolling to destroy her. 3 so much child abuse. Silly. 1 had a 10-hour mediation over a few dirty pans that originally came from Walmart. By the end I almost waived the fee to buy my client new pans to end the pain everyone else had to endure. 2 had a divorce where they still lived together because neither wanted to move. I believe they still live together several years later. They hated each other, so I don't understand, but their choice. 3 most clients destroy their own case, make the judge hate them by being terrible. I have had to tell them shut up more times than I can count. The husband in the case broke into the wife's, our client, home, poisoned some of her food, and left. She went to the hospital and ended up being perfectly okay, thankfully. I interned for a small family law firm in Virginia last summer and had 2 really odd stories. 1. This attractive lady came in seeking a divorce. Before divorcing, she and her husband moved into a house in the Virginia mountains with her parents, as they were relocating from Florida to Virginia to start their relationship over and had not found a new place to live yet. She had found his personal classified ads on Craigslist. If I remember correctly, well, crap keeps hitting the fan, and he kicks her out of her parents' house. You read that correctly. 2. Another crazy story was surrounding a mid-40s couple that got remarried. All of their children from their respective first marriages were grown up. Anyways, they decide to adopt 3 kids from some African county. At first they think the 2 girls and 1 boy are brother-sister, but end up being 2 sisters and a cousin. The kids had apparently seen some awful crap back in Africa. All their parents were dead or drug addicts, etc. Anyways, they all have terrible manners that they won't fix. Eating with their hands at the table, bad hygiene, obnoxious, etc. However, the really sad part was the older girl, around 11-12 years old. She was sexually assaulted, raped in Africa, and she had become sexually reactive. This means she was masturbating all the time, in public, and even once made her sister perform oral sex on her, which the mother found them doing in the bathtub. A really sad story. Told this one before, but it bears repeating and is also pretty crazy, at least in my opinion. I'm a land use and real estate lawyer, but a friend's friend is, or at least was, a divorce family lawyer. My friend once told me a story wherein my friend's divorce lawyer friend was attacked by a client's former spouse while doing his grocery shopping at a local supermarket with his wife and kids. The former spouse attacker has blamed the divorce attorney for taking him to the cleaners and for the downward spiral that followed the divorce. Last I heard, the lawyer who was assaulted in the grocery store decided to change practice areas. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Criminal lawyers often work with the worst people on their best behavior. Family lawyers often work with the best people on their worst behavior. Lawyers of Reddit, what is the most outrageous case someone has asked you to take? I am attorney practicing estate planning, wills and trust, probate. Not a week goes by that I don't hear a story about a family squabbling over an inheritance, but there was one guy in particular. He had an aunt who was a lesbian and had recently married her lifelong partner. His aunt died shortly after they were finally allowed to be legally married. Like many couples, they had a trust together, and as you would imagine, it left everything to the surviving spouse, and only when both of them died was it divided between other friends and relatives. The nephew was left with a fairly generous gift once both his aunt and her wife passed away. Apparently that wasn't good enough for him. He wanted to sue his aunt's widow to get his inheritance that he was entitled to now. I explained that wasn't really possible since the trust was very clear and it wasn't like his aunt left everything to her spouse under duress or anything like that. Also, the spouse had complete authority to change the trust and could theoretically cut him out of the trust entirely if she chose to. There is something that happens when tell people something contrary to what they want to hear. When you give someone advice that conflicts with how they believe the world works, they get upset, flustered, and more entrenched in their position. They will ask the same question multiple ways just to try you to tell them the answer they want to hear. You can see this phenomena often on our legal advice. So he kept asking different ways he could sue to get his inheritance, and I kept telling him that he would mostly likely lose the case and then not receive anything ever. Finally, he asked, "So what can I do?" My actual, legitimate legal advice: you can be really nice to your aunt's wife. He stormed out of my office without saying a word. That was a first for me. His mother was there for the entire meeting and apologized for his behavior, saying he's upset. He was really close to his aunt. Right. It was absolutely clear where he developed his sense of entitlement from. Not a lawyer, but worked in a law firm. Had a potential client who needed to access something on a high shelf when she was at work. Instead of using the step that was provided, she took it upon herself to take her shoes off, then stand on her chair to reach the shelf. She forgot about her own shoes on the way down and tripped over them. She tried to blame her employers. That's not how it works, love. There was another woman using a vacuum cleaner in her own home and she tripped over the lead. When we asked who it was in particular she intended to sue, as there was nothing wrong with the vacuum cleaner and no actual injury. She became confused and confessed she did not know. She just thought she could claim from someone. Pretty tame examples, but amusing at the time. Some people just need saving from themselves. When we asked who it was in particular she intended to sue, as there was nothing wrong with the vacuum cleaner and no actual injury, she became confused and confessed she did not know. She just thought she could claim from someone. This thread is full of crazy, absurd crap, but for some reason this little story killed me. Not lawyer but paralegal. I took a cold call one evening from a gentleman who was clearly high, probably and homeless. He wanted to sue his local police dispatch, 911, paramedics and a hospital. We are a civil litigation firm, because he knocked on someone who was now, allegedly, trying to get him. It was now the police station's fault that he would have to stab the guy, and he repeatedly asked me if he should carry a knife so he could do said stabbing. He apparently had also asked the 911 dispatch this same question, and all they would tell him is that no, he should not in fact go stab someone. Also asked if he should go stab the other guy before he had a chance to get him. He then wanted to come hide at our office while keeping his knife and deciding where to go stab the other guy. Definitely most surreal phone call of my life thus far. And before it's asked, no, we didn't report the situation to anyone. We are in a large city and he said his location was up north. Did not give us his name, and we don't have caller ID. Very old boss. Hates technology because he can't understand it. So we really didn't have anything to give the police as far as useful information. Fun times. Hidden in there, he actually had an interesting legal question regarding self-defense. He knows someone's going to kill him, the police aren't helping, and he wanted to know exactly what proactive steps he could take in the direction of his own self-defense before breaking laws. Too bad he couldn't communicate that question too well. So in my jurisdiction sometimes we get a case and may only have 5 minutes to talk to a client before preliminary hearing. Not an attorney yet, waiting bar results. But at an internship we had a client in criminal court that we defended. He met a woman at a bar. They had a few drinks and went back to her place. They had consensual sex, uncontested by either party. They both fell asleep in their underwear on her bed. The woman called the police the next morning and reported a sexual assault. Why, may you ask? Because in his sleep the man got an erection while spooning her. She claimed she did not consent to this action. The state actually charged the man. I was shadowing a female attorney, and I learned over time that she didn't know much about sex, but she leaned over to me and said, "Dongs get hard in your sleep. Can you control that crap?" I got to get in front of the court and explain how an erection in one's sleep is involuntary and therefore he did not have the intent to rub his erect dong on her. Case was dismissed at preliminary hearing. OMG. Defense by Morning Wood. Not a lawyer yet. I'm in my last semester of law school and about to take my last ever law school final today. As a law student you have the option of doing a lot of low-level pro bono work. I was at a family court as part of a project to help abused women get restraining orders against their abusers. To look loyally, all of us law students dressed up in suits. Family court tends to be filled with pro seffiers, people representing themselves. So, anyone dressed in a suit starts attracting all of the people who don't want to deal with the issues themselves, since hey, they look like a lawyer. This one gentleman came up to me and my partner, another law student, asking us if we could help him file a restraining order against his girlfriend because she wrote on her Facebook wall that he had a small penis, which he assured us wasn't true. He also wanted to get a restraining order against a different ex-girlfriend because she took some of his clothes and things when they broke up and he wanted them back. He also wanted to get a restraining order against his brother for beating him up when he was a kid. He was in his 30s. Good luck in your exams, man. A fellow came to me in 1996 and said he was able to stop his grand mal seizures by smoking pot. He was a very difficult, sometimes abusive hothead with a long history of criminal cases. He had no money. He wanted to make pot legal in Canada. Many lawyers had already turned him away. I took it on. Very reluctantly. It was obviously a complete long shot, but I was young and ambitious. George Soros Foundation learned about the challenge, funded the case and provided some experts. A few years later, and too many hours, arguments, tears and sleepless nights to count. Damned if he didn't win. His case became the national template for medical marijuana in Canada. The client wanted full legalization, so he was disappointed with the result. Oh well, I tried. Respect from an epileptic, Grand Miles. Not a lawyer, but my uncle once had a client trying to sue Sears for distributing pornography to minors because he caught his 12-year-old son masturbating to the lingerie section. Probably will be buried, but I defended a guy accused of rape. His defense was that the girl had been a one-night stand who had become obsessed with him and had broken into his house, found a used condom in the bin that he had ejaculated into and stole it, and had then smeared semen all over herself, punched herself in the face and had thrown herself into a bush on purpose before going to a hospital. She was doing this to get back at him for not wanting to be with her. I explained that a jury might not believe this, but that I would put the case if he wanted to. He was duly convicted. Lawyer and dog enthusiast here. During law school I had the opportunity to work under a special license for the public defender in my city. Like in most cities, they were grossly understaffed and overworked, so I had the potential as a 2L to do an actual misdemeanor trial. The client that I had to accept was a woman who killed 2 puppies by neglect. She left them in a cage outside in February with no food or water for weeks until they perished. Then she called animal control to get them. I couldn't look at this person without feeling utter disgust. It did not help that she had a mustache and a dead tooth. When I asked her why she waited so long to call animal control, thinking that she should have called before they were dead so they could have been saved, she replied, "I don't like dogs." I had to defend this woman as the first person I ever legally represented. She took a decent plea. When it was concluded, she thanked me and tried to shake my hand. I just gave her a look and left. Criminal prosecutor here. A patrol officer pulled over a driver for some traffic violation. I think failure to signal. After a heated roadside exchange where the driver initially refused to turn over her license, she ultimately relented and thrust the license with undue force into the officer's outstretched hand. The cop charged her with aggravated assault on a law enforcement officer. When asked to justify his actions, he stated that people need to learn to respect the police. We dismissed the charge, apologized to the defendant, and told the cop to never bring us something like that again. I can't recall if Internal Affairs was notified. I work with the police every day, and the majority of them are good people. This guy was a crap. Thank you for making the responsible choice. Many of the prosecutors I've worked with would have laughed and let the charges stand. My brother, fresh out of law school, was asked to defend the fraternity being sued for defecating in the dorm room of the pledge who did not finish his bid to be a brother. He called the co-defendants and the plaintiff the poopers and the poopy respectively in our group text. If you're hazing someone, you're in butthole. If you're hazing someone who isn't even part of your organization anymore, you're straight up stupid. Used to work in matrimonial law, which is the worst practice area of them all. You see fairly reasonably good people reduced to the worst of themselves in every aspect. They're emotionally distraught, seeking vengeance, wounded pride, etc. etc. Aside from the woman who really wanted in her motion for full custody papers the fact that her husband allegedly jerked off constantly leaving the couch sticky, left the door open while he did so. They had 5 kids, 1 in her teens and 4 around age 8. They were quadruplets, and left his used tissues everywhere, so she frequently sat in them. There was the septuagenarian who came in because his stripper wife. Wait, let's back up. The guy is an executive at a big company in NYC. He was faithful, supposedly, to his first wife of 40 years, cared for her through sickness and then her death, had a grown son, became addicted to strip clubs. He spent something like $20k a month at them, and then met a stripper that he eventually impregnated then married, with prenup. She had 2 kids with him. He reduced his strip club spending to $50k a year. Apparently she suspected him of being unfaithful with another stripper, so she filed for divorce. She claimed he was an unfit parent. He claimed the same. The guy was not attractive, though he kept himself well groomed, was trim, dressed reasonably well, just had a bland appearance. He was also in his 70s. I don't understand. Maybe he was just a dollar sign to the strippers. In any case, one day while discussing his prenup, we had to ask, did you cheat on her because that would nullify the prenup? No. Common name. Come on. We need to know all the information before we can proceed. I didn't have sex with the other stripper. Lucky for you. Oral sex does not constitute sex in the state of New York. My boss was a genius. I had to keep it together or I'd have laughed in the guy's face. BTW, his wife wanted to break the prenup, which afforded her $7.10k a month for childcare needs alone, and make him pay upwards of $25k a month. Absolutely ridiculous. Glad to be out of that crappy practice area. I'm not a lawyer, but as a child I was taken into foster care and then returned to my father's custody, so he had custody of me from ages 4-16. When I was 22 he tried to sue me for the costs involved in caring for me for that time, saying that he had no obligation to take custody of me and had only done so to save me from foster care. It was obviously dismissed and I don't talk to him anymore. That's seriously messed up on his part. Criminal defense social worker at a legal aid organization. I had a client who ran 3 red lights on a very busy street, knocked over a police officer, drove up on the sidewalk, forcing people to jump out of the way, and was finally dragged out of his car in a parking lot. He wanted us to refer him to a civil attorney to sue the city because an officer was too rough with him during his arrest. I mean, I get it. They were probably rough with him. Police brutality in my city is real, but good luck with that lawsuit. My abusive father took legal action against me for taking my things with me when I finally moved out of his house and on my own, claiming that he was the rightful owner of my clothes, school supplies, etc. Obviously the judge dismissed the case in about 30 seconds. We don't talk much anymore. Not a story from me but from my stepmother. Once, she was asked to and took a case involving alleged workplace racism, where an African American woman was offended by a man making a joke about African and European swallows, in response to someone's question about swallows. According to her, she literally had to buy and play clips from a VHS copy of Monty Python and the Holy Grail in court to show the woman that it wasn't racism, just a Monty Python reference. Luckily, the guy she accused won, and our family got to keep the VHS tape. According to her, she literally had to buy and play clips from a VHS copy of Monty Python and the Holy Grail in court to show the woman that it wasn't racism, just a Monty Python reference. That would be it for me. Hang up the lawyer in hat and just retire. It would never get better than playing Monty Python in court as a legitimate legal defense. Lawyer here. Breakup. They were not married. Client let his ex live in his house with her new boyfriend until her child, not my client's child, school year ends. Very reasonable and understanding as heck. All in child's interest. Client was rich and bought and paid for everything. Finally they move out. When we arrived there was nothing to see. She dug up half the 3-meter high spruce hedge with her boyfriend. Half is hers, she said. They planted them together. They probably burned it because we found some branches in the barrel behind the house, where there has clearly been burned something. House was cleaned out. They took even the spoons and carpets. 3 years already is this going on and I'm fighting over a freaking toilet brush and worthless carpets in court, which is in the list among 300 other items. Last time there were curtains and a boat carrier. I hate family law. Client just has a matter of principle. Had a woman call wanting to sue DreamWorks because her grandson watched the Bee Movie. Thought bees were his friends and ended up with a bunch of bee stings. Had a guy call wanting to sue his ex-girlfriend for pain and suffering. I explained to him that we were a personal injury firm and could not take his case since he was not injured. He countered with a broken heart as an injury. I'm late to the game. Lawyer. Once had a gentleman come to my office with an interest in suing his former employer. My office is general civil litigation, and I handle our employment matters. As an aside to that, he also specifically asked for a female attorney for reasons not related to this story. I met with him for about half an hour. He explained that he had been terminated from his employment and believed it to be gender biased. In my jurisdiction, an employer needs to show a legitimate, non-discriminatory reason for discharge, and while this hurdle can be overcome, it's a high one. I asked him if he had ever been disciplined, cited, or written up in the past, to establish if the employer would be able to say he was an unfit worker, if he had an unblemished record. Our job is easier. He said yes, 12 times, in 2 years. I finished the interview, thanked him for his interest in our business, but told him we would not be able to take the case. I sent him off with a few referral numbers, but I don't know if he ever found someone to take his case. I'm going to guess he was cited for sexual harassment 12 times in 2 years. Not a lawyer but a family friend is. She had someone come to her asking to sue Starbucks because someone spilled their latte or smoothie or whatever on the sidewalk and she slipped on it and hit her head. She claimed Starbucks was at fault because it wouldn't have happened if Starbucks didn't put extra slippery whipped cream in the drink. Not me, but my uncle takes weird injury cases. One involved a guy who sat down in a public toilet and the chemical they had just used to clean the seat gave him chemical burns on his butt and thighs. I have had several, but the best was a custody divorce about 5 years ago. This guy was a super smart engineer, but he fell for a woman who was just white trash. He married her and at the time of the divorce, they had 2 kids aged 6 and 4. One day she told him she wanted a divorce and wanted him to move out. It was a huge house in a gated community, so I advised him to move to another part of the house so he could be near his kids. I also told him that the reason she wanted him out of the house was so that she could have the man she was cheating on him with move in. He did not believe she was cheating, so I told him to go to the gate and check the logs. Sure enough, my client left every morning at 6:30 am for work, and around 7:30 am 3 to 5 times a week, another man would check in at the gate and say he was headed to my client's house. I dug into the name and it was my client's wife's ex-boyfriend, who was fresh off an 8-year stint in prison for sexual assault and attempted murder. Part of his parole was having to register as a sex offender. My client confronted his wife and recorded her response. One-party consent state. She basically admitted to cheating, admitted to her lover being a sex offender, then told my client she wanted to move her lover in, and if my client did not move out, she would make their children's lives miserable and make sure they know it is because daddy is being selfish. She lawyered up after that and we played the tape for her attorney in the first conference. He made some noise about consent and it not sounding like her, but he knew her allowing a registered sex offender around her kids was damning. In the end, he got the house, full custody, and the bank accounts. She got 1 car, her clothes and jewelry which were very valuable, some of the household items, and $25,000 cash. She literally moved from a palatial home in a gated neighborhood in the nicest part of town into a trailer in an unincorporated part of the county. Don't marry trash. Also, think twice about who you are having children with. My dad's story. As a previous lawyer in California, this husband and wife were getting a divorce. Everything went normal except the husband requested partial custody. This was fine except for the fact that they had no children. No, the husband wanted partial custody of the dog. The jurisdiction is that pets are personal property, so this couldn't be arranged in the first place. But my dad had to wonder why the heck this guy wanted partial custody of a pet. So why do you want partial custody? Does the pet mean that much to you? No, it's that we both like the dog, so she'll have custody and like it, but when I get custody, I'm gonna take it to the vet and have it put down. That's 101 on what you don't say to your defense lawyer. Interned at a law office. Client came in to consult with my boss. They owned a horse farm in the country and their sister had ridden one of the horses off the farm into swampy boggish territory off the beaten path. The client was dead set on suing the sister for decreasing the value of her horse and wanted to sue her for $500 of damaged goods. My boss just kind of sat there and stared at her. Being the good guy he is, he told her, "Miss, it's going to cost you more than $500 in legal fees. You'll be better off doing this in small claims court. But I wouldn't recommend that either, as the judge will likely throw out the case." The client was vehement in suing her sister in court with an attorney to teach her a lesson that she can't just ride off on other people's horses without permission. Boss told her there was no way in good faith that he could assist with this lawsuit. Detective here, not a lawyer, but once had a man want me to charge his wife's lover with sexual assault because she was mentally coerced into having an affair. I told him that Jedi mind tricks don't meet elements of the offense. He filed a complaint against me which was unfounded. In NC they have something called Alienation of Affection and you can sue someone who has an affair with your spouse. A friend of mine got a pretty hefty sum from some schmuck that slept with his wife. I once worked as a prosecutor on the misdemeanor docket and heard some really amazing defenses that, if the defendant had an attorney, would not have made. My favorite was this guy charged with speeding who gave what I call the $5 footlong defense. He pled guilty but wanted to provide an explanation to the judge that he had just eaten a $5 roast beef footlong from Subway and was speeding to get home before he fell asleep because roast beef is sedating. The judge chuckled and asked if he meant to say turkey, a lunch meat that might cause some form of mild sedation. The man realized his mistake and said that the $5 footlong contained both. I am trying not to burst out laughing as he used the word $5 footlong about a half dozen times by this point, like he was actively advertising for Subway. The judge said he didn't think there was such a $5 footlong available at Subway. At this point, the entire courtroom was laughing. The judge told him to choose his food more carefully and slow down, along with giving him the maximum fine. Not a lawyer, but I worked at a law office and sat in on some meetings to take notes. We had a guy come in, it was his case evaluation, and my boss, the lawyer, asked what he wanted to do. He said sue lake. He mentioned a specific lake but I can't remember which one. I did my best to keep a straight face and my boss asked why he wanted to sue the lake. He said that it ate his boat. We asked if he meant it sunk. He said that no, it didn't. It ate it. The boat was gone one day and he checked the video and the video showed the water level of the lake rise almost 4 inches and fall again, which caused the boat to break loose off the dock and sink. He showed us the video and sure enough, here is this little 4-person John boat with a motor, and exactly that happened. My boss said that she'd take the case but thought it couldn't guarantee how well it would do in court. She then asked if he knew who the owner was. He was the owner. Besides, he just wanted to sue the lake, not the owner. When my boss said she'd need some money to process the paperwork, he threw down a brick of cash. I was a paralegal at a big personal injury firm for several years right after college. 2 unusual stories. Letter from a man in jail. Firms that advertise on TV get many of these. He wanted to sue Oprah, the Oprah, because she was a witch and she had put a curse on his body. This curse caused pain in his eyes, liver, and testicles. This was like a 6-page letter. Man called wanting to sue Burger King because he and his mother got sick after eating 50 burgers over the course of a weekend. He said they routinely bought a lot of burgers and would freeze them to eat throughout the week. Yes, freeze whole cooked burgers, buns and condiments and all. Of course they both got sick and couldn't leave the house out of fear of going in my pants. The thing is, BK Corporate had already refunded them for the cost of the food when they complained. He wanted more compensation for their terrible experience, and he wanted them to pay for his taxi fare. Yep, they took a taxi to Burger King and made the taxi wait while 50 burgers were prepared. We didn't take either case. A year out of law school, I once had a potential client who wanted me to sue Canada. Apparently he could not get into the country due to his felony record. I tried to reason with him that it was up to the sovereign nation to set its own rules regarding entry to the country, but he insisted that we could make a lot of money suing Canada. I didn't take the case, but I told him I might be able to get him a letter that said sorry from Canada. This reminds me of Better Call Saul when that crazy dude wanted to sue the government to make his ranch a sovereign state, or something like that. Saul wanted to take the case because of how many hours he could bill. He needed cash, but then the guy tried to pay him in his own currency he created for his new sovereign state, saying it would be worth billions once they won their case. LMAO. Divorce lawyers of Reddit. What is the most insane, evil, funny, dumb way a spouse has tried to screw the other? A friend's ex-wife, and he settled their divorce with her getting the house, a hefty chunk of retirement, all the gifted jewelry and his Harley she had gifted him for his birthday. A few weeks later, a robbery occurred and the only thing that was stolen was the jewelry that he had gifted her, which was intended for their daughter. She tried to file an insurance claim on the jewelry but forgot to get appraisals and adders riders, so the max insurance paid was $1,500 for over $20,000 of jewelry. Suspicion is she staged it but is now stuck with stolen jewelry she can't legally sell, nor wear, nor give to the daughter without tipping the dad off to the scam. Whoa, today is my day. Another where to start? The person who hid $250,000 from a business sale so it wouldn't be included in the equalization payment, while providing frank disclosure on the actual sale number. The person who made a fake prostitution ad for their ex as proof that they were not a good parent, without considering that I would want to know why they browsed prostitution ads during their parenting time. The ones who spent thousands of dollars working out the appropriate access, custody, and support terms for their dog? Hard to say. Unreasonable people keep my lights on. At least they cared about the dog, unlike the other people in this thread. Not a divorce lawyer, but my grandma sucker her divorce lawyer before she served her husband the papers, got pregnant, and then convinced her husband it was his. He paid child support for 18 years and never had a clue. Pretty crappy. The lawyer had a family of his own. They have no idea my mom and my family exist. 18 years, and on her 18th birthday he found out it wasn't his. Not a lawyer but was a legal intern for a divorce attorney a few years back. Dumbest freaking divorce I ever sat through, lasted over 2 years because they refused to let each other get any ground. I was only there for the last year of the divorce, but they argued over who got the Christmas ornaments for 4 months. Pro tip: if you're ever in a divorce, saying sure, take it is infinitely cheaper than your invoice would be otherwise. Not a lawyer, but when I went through my divorce we were still in the same house for a few months while it sold. I spent a weekend at my brother's a couple hours away to go to a football game to get out of the house. My ex-wife sold off most of the furniture I was planning on taking, a bunch of my power tools, and tried to give the dog away. Luckily the people didn't show up for the dog. That day I took him to my brother's house for safekeeping. She still tried to get the dog in the divorce and was denied. Soulless B. Pup is my best friend and still going strong, almost 13 years old. Not an attorney. Heard this one from a friend of mine. He was put in the middle of his parents' divorce. His mom is a teacher in Ontario, Canada, and she gets paid very well. $120K per year. His dad is just a general laborer and made about $55K per year. When they got divorced he gave her the house free and clear with the understanding that when she retires he will get 55% of her pension to offset his interest in the house. She agrees. Of course, she has to retire for him to get his money. Fast forward a few years and his mom retires but never tells his dad. The son finds out and told his mom, "Hey, you are retired, you have to start giving dad his money." She tells the son, "Don't tell your dad, please." Fast forward a few more years. He finds out his dad is in financial difficulty because of the downturn in the economy. He backhanded tells his dad that his mom has been retired for a few years now. So he contacts his attorney. Now she is screwed. She pee off the family. Divorce. Court because she agreed to this and is now trying to screw him over. In the end, he gets 65% of her pension for the rest of their lives and she has to pay him all the money that she owes him. Not a lawyer. Just grew up with a crappy family situation. My mom was an evil mastermind with this divorce, let me tell you. So my parents had been separated but living in the same house for a while, and it was around the time of year the family would normally go for a camping trip. Canada Day I believe. She convinced my dad that we would break the trip up and he would get a week. Then when he returned she would get a week with us, the 3 kids. Secretly during my dad's week she got her friends to help clear the entire house out. And I literally mean clear it out. There was nothing left. Not a single clothes hanger. No couches. TVs, quite literally nothing. She chose this vacation setup really well too. Camping meant we didn't need money or have access to cell service, which she took advantage of as well and emptied the bank accounts and hid all the money away. She didn't stop there though. She also maxed out lines of credit and all credit cards. Normally this would take a while, but she was smart as heck in this approach. Earlier when planning this divorce she had convinced my dad to quit his job, quite high paying I should add, to start a company. This company was still new and needed a ton of expenses paid, so the banks didn't think twice about this ridiculous amount of money being transferred, as it wasn't out of the norm anyways from their new setup with the company. Then, when it came time for my dad's trip to end, she told him he needed to call her when he got back in cell range. Upon calling, she told him that she was on the way out in the same direction anyway, so we could just meet halfway to spare us kids a bit of driving time on our way to the next trip. Which was odd considering after a week of camping we all wanted to shower and clean up, but she was very adamant. We met up and swapped vehicles. Then my dad was on the way home alone, while we were off to hide away at a location different than where she had told my dad. When he got home he thought we had been robbed. It didn't sink in. He called the cops and started phoning family because of how empty the house was. He broke down and didn't know what to do. That's when my mom's dad came over and told him the truth. He said she left him and took everything. She hid us and I believe tried to steal us, but that part is a bit fuzzy for me. Eventually it somewhat caught up with my mom. The judge was shocked at what she did. She even went as far as trying to convince us kids that my dad was abusive and had us interrogated by a cop wanting us to lie about him. The whole situation was crazy. She ended up blowing all the money on fancy trips and shopping sprees with her friends, and when the judge ordered her to pay it back she fled the country. Now she lives in Australia and doesn't have to pay anything. Doubt this'll be seen, but a family friend was the lawyer on a pretty cut and dry divorce case. He was representing the husband, and he felt pretty bad for him. No bad history between the two, but even standard cases can get messy. Apparently his wife was being seriously sharky and trying to take basically everything. The guy was at wit's end. Our family friend was driving behind him on the way to court when he crashed his truck into an SUV. Didn't seem too bad. Flipped the SUV on its side, but he was already in it helping the other driver out. It was right in front of the courthouse, so no big deal. Lots of cops around to help. Then our family friend realized something concerning. The SUV looked a lot like the guy's wife's SUV. Before he could say anything, he saw the cops suddenly swarm the guy and pin him to the ground. While everyone watched on thinking this guy was helping, he actually was stabbing his wife repeatedly with a screwdriver. She unfortunately didn't survive. Pretty sure that was the last divorce case our family friend took. TLDR. Divorce lawyer witnesses his client literally screw his spouse to death. You're right that this one isn't being seen, but it's the most brutal. Child of traumatic divorce here. There's so many, and I mean so many things I could post on this thread about how freaking terrible my parents were to each other, but this takes the cake. My parents were separated, in the process of divorcing, and had split custody between my brother and I. We were 5 and 7 at the time. My dad didn't have his own place yet, so when it was his turn to be with us he came back to our house. The one he purchased, mind you, and my mom was supposed to leave. One weekend they were arguing over something and it got so bad that my mom wouldn't leave and told my dad she would call the police, something she apparently did a lot to get her way, which after growing up with her I can attest she did this a lot unnecessarily to control us. So she left, called the police, told them my father was dangerous and had a gun. My dad was in the army and we had plenty guns, locked in a safe of course. Of course the police were just doing their job and took my mom at face value. It went so fast from my brother and I watching TV with my dad to the police knocking at our door, my dad opening the door and getting pepper sprayed without the cops saying anything, and then my dad locked the door and the cops couldn't bust it down. So they came around back and broke our sliding glass door in so they could arrest my dad in our front yard with all our neighbors watching. I didn't really understand what was happening at the time, but it was traumatizing for sure. Then my mom tried to get full custody of us in their actual divorce, and thank God the judge ruled for split custody. My whole childhood was crappy honestly. BC all they did was explain very deep and emotionally complex situations to very young children who just wanted their parents to love each other. But yeah, I've never quite forgiven my mom for that one. I read about a case where the wife was trying to take half of a guy's business and millions in personal assets, only to find out that the business had been moved into his son's name years earlier, and the guy donated all their savings, millions of dollars, to a children's hospital in his soon-to-be ex-wife's name so she couldn't get the money. The judge said what he did was technically legal since it was community property and no freeze had been placed on it yet, but was morally unconscionable. Lawyer said in his entire life he never saw a bigger smile on a man's face. He just kept saying I just wanted to help the children and smiling. Not a divorce lawyer, but remember this from another Reddit. Husband and wife getting divorced. There was a classic car, Ferrari, Jaguar or something like that was worth a lot of money. It was a bone of contention in the divorce. After several months the husband finally proposes that he will let her have the car if she gives him the house. She agrees. Come to find out he had been taking the car out every day and doing loops around the city for hours, putting thousands of miles on it, making it worth nothing. Holy crap. Divorces can really bring out the worst in people. Not a lawyer, but one of my drinking buddies just went through a nasty divorce. One of the things she pitted against him was $15k a year spent at a bar. Sounds bad, but 90% of the time they were both there, but he always paid with his card. But now he looks like an alcoholic. Honestly, that's when you call up the manager or even ask the judge to do it so he can verify she was there with him. He owed her $500 as part of the settlement. He brought 2 buckets of unsorted coins, mostly pennies, to our office. She took the light bulbs out of every fixture when she moved out, then refused to give him right of first refusal if she wanted to get rid of their dog. She spent a year and a half systematically destroying their business and then expected him to pay her hundreds of thousands of dollars for her share of the, now worthless, business. $500 in a small coins is a dong move, but relatively harmless. You put it in manageable containers, take it to the bank, and deposit it. You get exercise, and the bank counts your money for you. Taking all the light bulbs is a dong move, but also relatively harmless. You get to go buy more bulbs and a flashlight, and put bulbs back in. Deliberately destroying communal property is unconscionable. Read about 5 answers by now and I want to point out that an insane amount of them led to animal cruelty. What the frick is that about? Probably because it's the most effective way to hurt the other person without breaking the law, which means they should probably make it against the law. Not a lawyer, but my mom forged divorce papers to cheat on my dad. For 2 years I got my butt beat whenever I brought it up. I chuckled at the last sentence, not out of malice, but I too have been in that crap situation where bringing something up is detrimental to your safety. Sorry bud. Used to work as a file clerk for a divorce attorney. Our client was trying to get full custody over her child because her husband was dangerously neglectful of their son. How was he being dangerously neglectful? By serving spaghetti instead of turkey for Thanksgiving. I wish I was making this up. Not a lawyer but child of divorced parents. Mum got custody of me and my brother. She told my dad she would make us hate him. Went from a big house to a 3-bedroom apartment and grew up poor. Only saw my dad 3 times a year and talked to him on the phone once a week for an hour. Turns out that's what she asked for in court, but she lied and said our dad didn't want to see or talk to us. He paid her child support and alimony every month and she worked full time. We grew up with no Wi-Fi or cable, no sports or after school activities, and I never went to a summer camp. Apparently we also didn't have insurance for like 2 years when I was 12. Turns out she was pocketing all the money and keeping it in her savings. Apparently around the divorce hearing when I didn't have insurance she had $12,000 in savings, but the judge didn't see that as a red flag. We did hate our dad until we got older and realized he was trying to give us stuff the whole time and offering to send us to summer camp, but she refused. Even after her hoarding all that money and us not growing up with our dad, he still paid for my college and books and bought me a car when mine broke down. I ended up stopping a relationship with my mom when I found out she called me a W in order to defend my brother's behavior. She didn't bother to reach out even though she's the parent. Later I contacted her on and off trying to fix the relationship. She never bought a book for uni and also refused to let me use her tax info to get a better loan for school when I had to my last year of university. In the end, her bitterness fricked her over because she no longer has a daughter and she has a son who yells at her and uses her for free rent. My ex did a good job of tricking me that we were having a nice, cordial, easy divorce until she asked me to sign a couple of quick, easy things. She was in a real hurry and got upset that I said I needed a couple of hours to read through them. Turns out she got someone to sneak in there that I was emotionally abusive, which was the opposite of the truth. I had to end up getting my own lawyer because of her shady crap, and mine said she could have essentially taken anything and all of what she wanted if I would have signed that. Yeah, don't ever sign anything just real quick. My mom worked at an animal hospital about 20 years ago while she was studying to become a vet. One day a guy brought in 2 beautiful chocolate labs and said they needed to be put down. He had won both in a divorce and was leaving town, so he wanted to get rid of them to make the move easier. My mom took this really hard and I think it's what made her choose another path in life. Not a divorce lawyer, but my mom used to have these girl party weekends where all these women would come over. My mom would inject different fruits with vodka with a needle she got from the hospital she worked at. Well, my parents had a rocky marriage and I guess it showed at school when I was young because Child Protective Services showed up at my school and then our door. My mom falsely accused my dad of using the needle that she randomly found in the house for injecting H and went as far as getting a restraining order put on him so I couldn't see him for months. 6 months later they were back together, and my dad did a drug test that found no H in his system. Stupidness. Not me, but my cousin is a vet whose friend went through a divorce. She was friends with the wife and husband, but the wife was a nasty bee. Their dog had puppies a month prior to the divorce and the husband wanted all the dogs. She gets them and instead of selling the puppies brings them to my cousin saying she wants all 6, I believe, puppies, and the mother put down. My cousin takes them and says she's do it and the wife just leaves. Little does she know my cousin snuck them all out the back door with help from all her co-workers and gave the puppies to the husband. This happened about 4 or 5 years ago, so sorry for the vague details. Good on your cousin. I'm just emotionally exhausted after reading about all the euthanized animals. Not a lawyer, but a child of divorce. My parents owned a couple duplexes in town as well as our house. They had saved enough up to pay a property off in full and my dad convinced my mom that it was better to pay off one of the duplexes instead of the house. A couple months later he files for divorce and only asks for the paid off property. He got it, lived in one side and rented out the other, and stuck my mom with 2 kids and 3 mortgages, and of course refused to pay child support for my sister because she wasn't his bio daughter even though he had legally adopted her. Still makes me feel like how conniving he was. I was a divorce paralegal for 15 years. The worst opposing party we ever had represented himself. He cheated and left his wife, then proceeded to file for custody of the dog. After 2 hearings just about the dog, the judge orders that they share the dog, alternating 1 week at a time. On his first round of visitation, he collects this sweet dog and then immediately has it put to sleep. The following week he gives ex-wife a canister with the dog's ashes. Obviously she was devastated. It was heartbreaking. The judge was not happy. He sanctioned this man and then gave literally everything to the wife in the judgment. This guy was such a nutball. He even tried to claim the condiments in the fridge as property. Literally wrote it out in his property claim. Ketchup, mustard, mayo. He also claimed that wife's sex toys should be awarded to him. Real classy guy. I am no longer practicing, but when I was active I practiced in a small firm. We represented the wife in a divorce against her husband, who was a very prominent businessman. As a show of force by the husband, he purchased the building where our offices were located and proceeded to make small but annoying changes. Parking spaces were moved to furthest spots. Elevator would randomly be down for maintenance. Our offices were located on the top floor. The cleaning schedule and crews would sporadically change. The firm's lease also happened to end during the divorce representation, and we were given a notice to vacate in the middle of the winter holidays. After our departure, husband put up signage of his company on the outside of the building where our offices used to be located. I am not really a divorce lawyer, but I am currently stuck with a divorce case. Both sides have been at a standstill for at least 4 months now over a difference of less than $1,000. Like, we could have settled late 2019, but they both just want one last high one over the other one. Doesn't help that I hate family law cases to begin with. The only winners are the attorneys, and they have to go through a lot of booze to cope with the stuff they deal with. Again, not a divorce lawyer, but 30 years ago a friend of mine was going through a messy divorce. His wife had cheated on him and was trying to take him for everything. Really spiteful when she didn't get something. The court had instructed her to turn over the car to him. She waited until the last day on the order and then returned it with serious body engine damage. It was pretty clear she'd run it into a wall or tree out of spite right before doing it. But since she just left him parked on the street by his apartment and dropped the keys in his mailbox, there was no way to prove it. I came up with a solution. Get it stolen. As a favor to him, I drove the car up to Harlem while he followed in his other car, parked it in front of some gang members, waved to them, blatantly tossed the keys on the driver's seat through the open window, and then got in his other car with him and we left. We went around the block, waited 10 minutes, went back, and the car was gone. Car was never seen again. He reported it as stolen and collected the insurance. Nice job waiting out the statute of limitations there. My sister and her ex-husband had agreed in arbitration that he would keep the house and car and that she would keep the furniture and electronics. My dad and I rented a U-Haul to help her go get her stuff. We figured the amount of stuff she would get would be enough to get about $10 $15K off Craigslist. We arrived at the house to find only an IKEA futon, a smaller TV than they had, an old iMac, and all the outdoor furniture destroyed. We were so devastated for her. She decided she wanted to close that venomous chapter of her life, so she just took her losses rather than fight for stupid possessions. Happy ending. She finished optometry school and became an optometrist, found a great husband, and is raising 2 awesome kids. The divorce lawyer my mother-in-law had to fight had a case so vicious that they wanted everything split right down the middle, up to the block of cheese in the fridge, and she won that case. I can only imagine how long it took to split everything in the house. It won't be funny though, but definitely evil. My mother left my father because of a 40s crisis. At first she said it was to get her freedom back so people were more empathetic to my father. Seeing that, she changed her version and started to spread the word my father cheated on her and raped her. When I stood up for my father, she claimed I beat her during years as well. You would be surprised how people would definitely believe a female who claimed being a victim of domestic and sexual violence. It's been 8 years. I've lost more than half of my genealogical tree, even on my father's side. See, like her are the reason real victims aren't taken enough seriously. My dad on the other hand is still madly in love with her and says we need to forgive to move on. Wish I could be half this brave. Watched a $14 million settlement, which took months to achieve, abandoned when the parties came to who would keep the cat. For that, there was a week-long trial. Jurors wanted to euthanize them both and take the cat home themselves. Opposing party left on his daughter's birthday while she was gone with her mom to her birthday party. He also took the freezer containing most of the food in the home. He had controlled all the finances and left his wife and his child with almost no food or money. A vindictive co-worker was going through a divorce and talked about it endlessly. The part that peed me off about it was every time she talked about the possessions she was fighting over. Even she referred to them as his tools or his car or his dog. She knew they were his things, but was fighting him for them just out of spite. I'm sure her lawyer was loving it cashing in. Not a lawyer, but an older cousin's ex-wife tried to get literally half of the house in a divorce. Like, she wanted to have half of the house removed and demolished just to spite my cousin whom she had cheated on. I was a fam law paralegal, but my worst was my own divorce. Actually, my ex came out as gay and decided he wanted to be a costume designer. Okay, well, bad for me, but more power to him. He decided the historical collection of paper dolls my grandma had left me should go to him because he wanted them as models for his costume designs. My lawyer had to claim them, the shoebox of paper dolls, as non-marital property due to being an inheritance. His lawyer made some sort of legal claim about how they were commingled, and thus marital property, because I'd put other stuff in the box that I had bought during the marriage, such as a coloring book. So in an otherwise uncontested divorce, there's a giant paragraph in the decree awarding me my non-marital, inherited box of paper dolls. I had a co-worker whose husband, a doctor, threw her out of the house that they shared for more than 30 years. He had a new girlfriend and wanted her to move in. She had no idea he was cheating on her. Since she was working for him, she was left with nothing. No job, no money. He canceled her cards and bank accounts, and nowhere to live. In a hurry to work, she only found a minimum wage job and a tiny studio apartment. At that time she was in her early 60s and not in good health. He dragged that divorce for years, gave money to their spoiled kids, so they took his side. I never understood why someone could be so mean to the woman he once loved, the mother of his children, a woman who worked for him for years, helping him build his practice. The only explanation I can find is his love of money. Finally, a couple of years later, he was accused of sexual misconduct and lost his license. Technically he retired. His beautiful house has been for sale for months now, and it's probably going to be demolished for a new development. I have no idea if the girlfriend is still with him, but in a perfect scenario I hope she left him. As for my co-worker, we lost touch after I left the store, but I hope she found happiness. Not a lawyer, but was involved in a case as a character witness to the husband father. To preface the story, he was an annuities investor and had his money and home before he met his wife. He also had a prenuptial agreement that was ignored during division of assets. He was also divorcing her for infidelity, witnessed by both of his children and caught on household security cameras. As the case came to an end, the California judge passed down equal split of assets. One house was to be sold with profits split down the middle. 2. All household possessions sold and split. 3. Alimony and child support would equal to half his pre-tax wages. 4. She would receive half of his retirement and investments. 5. She had 70% custody with jurisdiction over visitation. 6. She was to keep his Porsche, Escalade and Mercedes S550. He kept the BMW 750i. 7. He was responsible for all court costs and fees for both parties. The crazy response to this, while still in court, was 1. He immediately called and quit his job. 2. He had already sold his house to his brother for $50,000 before the proceedings. House in Newport Beach, CA, worth $2.70 mil. 3. Changed his life insurance so his brother was the recipient. When he called and quit right in front of the judge, I laughed my butt off. When my parents were mid-divorce, took years because my cheating awful alcoholic father refused to sign the papers. My dad had a weekend visit with us and ended up kidnapping us from our mother for about a week. I was maybe 10 and my brother was 8, so that puts us in 2005ish. He enrolled us in school. This is the only part of the story I remember. We went for about 2 days at my grandparents' house and took us to live there. My mom couldn't call the police since they were legally married with no custody agreement. He was allowed to keep us wherever he wanted. My mom could not come pick us up because she filed a restraining order against my father previous to this incident. He and my grandparents threatened to call the police if she came on the property. So my clever mom called him and was like, let's talk about this. My dad's still in love with her and dumb as frick agrees and meets her at a mutual friend's home. Really only mom's friend. And they get him trashed. He's an alcoholic and would never turn down booze. She keeps him up drinking all night and convinces him to take us all out for breakfast. She waits at the end of the driveway while dad gets cleaned up. He sends us outside, and when we get in the car, with none of our stuff, mind you, mom whips it out of there, and we didn't see dad for a long time after that. Not a divorce lawyer, but I had an old neighbor that got a new car and then went back the next day and told them her husband loved her so much that he wanted the exact same thing and the exact same financing. She immediately hid that car at her mom's house and then filed for divorce. The affair came to light when they pulled the second car over and a strange man was driving it around. Lawyers of Reddit, what was the best gotcha moment you ever experienced? My only full trial. Contractor ripping off my client who was no son. I went through entire contract where each sub was listed and he agreed to each line as being part of contract. He agreed that amount was to be paid to the subs. He agreed to the total. What he failed to do was list any profit. My last question was, where is your profit in this contract? No answer from him. As written, he was working for free. Case dismissed by judge without me having to present my side. Most of mine are my own clients admitting the crime to police but not realizing it. So it's less gotcha and more time for a plea. Oh, I thought I was still driving in the parking lot when I put down my phone. Yeah, that's the charge too. There was no weapon. I'm the weapon. Welp. There's no way I was going. Speed, I was only going. Other speed well over the limit, etc. I represent tenants in eviction proceedings. Landlords being landlords. I have lots of gotcha stories. The most recent one was last week, in a classic he said, she said case. That is, the entire case depended upon whom the jury believed. When the landlord was sworn in prior to testifying, she unnecessarily said yes, on the Bible, when asked to tell the truth, the whole truth, etc. Her testimony, however, was evasive. She avoided answering almost every one of my questions. She even avoided answering some of her own lawyer's questions. During a recess, but still in the middle of her testimony, she was seen outside the courtroom, in full view of the jury, whispering with her lawyer and a family member about, obviously, what she was supposed to say on the stand. When she got back up, the first thing I did was ask her what she was talking about with her lawyer and her family member outside the courtroom. I demanded to know whether they were telling her how to answer my questions. Her lawyer objected. The judge overruled the objection and ordered the witness to answer. The witness responded, "My life is my life." During closing arguments, her lawyer tried to argue that she must have been telling the truth because she swore on the Bible even though she didn't have to. That meant, according to him, that she took her oath more seriously than the average person. Impliedly, my client, who wouldn't bother swearing on a Bible when not asked to do so. In my response, I agreed with the landlord's counsel that his client must take her oath to tell the truth seriously. She must have taken it so seriously, in fact, that she refused to lie under oath when her truthful testimony would have sunk her case. So, instead, she just refused to answer almost every question put to her. The jury came back in about 30 minutes with a 12-0 verdict in the tenant's favor. Someone told me this. The lawyer was describing the theft. The footprints make it seem as though he didn't go to the basement. And the defendant said, "Actually we did." I think it was a Judge Judy clip where the woman is listing a number of items stolen from her by an ex-boyfriend. Jewelry, credit cards, electronics, and a certain amount of money. There wasn't $X cash in there immediately followed by that side judges do when people are that dumb. Done. Not the lawyer, but happened to my father-in-law. He had a lucrative commercial construction business and was ready to retire and sell it. He got a buyer and part of the deal was receiving a portion of the profits for several years. Somehow, the company had no profits, but there was all sorts of evidence of wealth, new cars, etc. The new owners slip up. He kept on the head secretary, who loved my father-in-law. She gave dad the information he needed. At trial, the new owner was on the stand. "Nope, we're really just struggling to break even." Dad attorney asked, "What is this corporation?" Before there was an answer, the buyer's attorney literally jumped up and said, "Your Honor, we would like to discuss a settlement." New buyer started a second company. Dad's company was buying the supplies, and new company was getting paid. It's called cooking the books. I heard this from my lawyer. 8 months into the case, 12 hours into a deposition, the client stood and said, "I'm sick of this. I made it all up." Never posted this before. Ex-wife, X. Trying to fight ex-husband's new girlfriend, NG. NG is in her car trying to flee while X is beating on car, blocking escape, and grabbing at door handles to get in, but doors are locked. After X briefly moved out from the path of the car, NG begins to drive away slowly. X, noticing the car starting to leave, dives onto the hood of the car, slides off, gets run over at slow speed, and breaks bones. Several surgeries later, X sues NG, alleging negligence in hitting X with the car. As I'm deposing X, she claims to have never touched the car before it hit her, never punched or kicked the car, never broke the windshield wipers, never grabbed the door handle to try to open the door, never dove on the hood, just yelling. I asked what NG was doing during this time, and X describes NG as deer in headlights, staring straight ahead, locked in her car, both hands on the steering wheel. How did you know the doors were locked? That one got dismissed pretty quickly. This is one of the best stories on here. It's so subtle but so sweet. Columbo type moment. Ian and have told this story before, but it is a good one. I had a problem with my cell provider and my cell phone wasn't receiving a signal where my cottage is located, even though it was clearly marked as an area that would receive a full signal on their map. I went back to provider and told them of my problem and they gave me a different phone with the same results. I then took back the phone and charger because they were useless to me at the time. This was over 20 years ago. They then sued me. In court I had a picture of the phone screen showing no bars while standing on my dock. Their lawyer argued that the picture could have been taken anywhere. Then the judge piped up, I know where your cottage is. I have a cottage nearby. I switched providers because I could hardly get a signal where I am. There's no way you'll get a signal from X provider. Then the judge ripped into the representative from the cell company and their lawyer. It was a good day. Dang, that cell provider is anal. I sat in on a criminal trial, and the defense basically had no defense other than there were documents lying around with the name Jack Smith and our client's name is John Smith, so there might have been someone else living in the house hiding the drugs. In the very last minute of closing arguments, the prosecutor stood up and said, I'm really tired of you spending all week pretending you don't know who Jack is when you know very well. Your trial binders, which have been sat on your desk all week, say Jack Smith, because that's what he goes by. Husband and wife charged with drug sales. Wife had given a full admission to the cops and ended up pleading before trial. The drugs were found in a shed with tools that the husband admits are his, but he denies knowing anything about the drugs. I go to trial against husband, and during his testimony, he says something about traditional family values. On cross, I start asking about his relationship with his wife. He admits that he's in charge of the finances, admits she has to ask permission to spend money. He ends up saying that she doesn't do anything without his permission. I then ask him if he knows she admitted to selling drugs. He did. So wouldn't she need his permission to do that? Of course she would, he says. No further questions. Jury comes back guilty in less than half an hour. Obligatory, not a lawyer, but my grandparents had the longest running divorce settlement in LA history in the 70s. My grandpa refused to pay his alimony. 1 year, he went to Hawaii and sent my grandma a postcard that said something along the lines, but more wittingly, I'm enjoying all of your alimony money, look at what I'm doing with it. She drove it straight to her lawyer, and it was game over for Gramps. I was prosecuting a traffic ticket and ended my opening statement with something similar to, by the end of the day you'll agree that the officer caught the defendant going 65 in a 50. Defendant, representing himself, stands up and says, while he may have clocked me going 65 in a 50, judge stopped the trial, excused the jury, and was like, you just confessed, so are we changing your plea to no contest or what? As a 18-year-old computer store owner, I had a guy sue me because his computer was a lemon. Well, he chose to represent himself, to which the judge said only an idiot would represent himself, begged the guy to postpone and get a lawyer. Nope. So the guy rambled for 20 minutes and made himself look like a complete redneck moron who just didn't know how to use computer. So then it was my turn. My lawyer stood up and said some legal phrase to the effect of the plaintiff failed to ask for any damages, therefore we ask for summary dismissal. Gravel bang. Granted, Mr. Plaintiff, I told you that you needed an attorney. Dude, when even the judge tells you to get a lawyer, maybe you should get one. I represented an insurance company to recover monies it paid under a homeowner's policy. Google subrogation. It was a multi-million-dollar home with a 450-gallon custom fish tank on the second floor. The owner hired a company to clean the tank, and they brought in a fish specialist to make sure the fish were properly maintained, stored for the cleaning. The specialist then goes to lunch and turns it over to a 22-year-old they had hired a week before, who could have doubled for Keanu Reeves in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. The kid just had to drain the tank and start cleaning. Up and until I deposed the kid, the fish tank company claimed they had properly drained the water into the municipal sewer system. It's not the case. The kid, who has been fired long before I deposed him and didn't give two shoots about rolling on his employer, testifies that he sparked a joint right after his boss left and then proceeded to drain the tank. But this was the first time he had done a second story job. The hose they had wouldn't make it to where it needed to go, so he went into the nearest bathroom. Mindful of his customer, he didn't want to dump 450 gallons of dirty fish water into the tub or sink, so he leans the hose over the counter and into the toilet, ends up walking out and leaving it there to grab some munchies. When he got back, there was 449 gallons of dirty fish water all throughout the house. The case settled within 3 days of the deposition. But this was the first time he had done a second story job. All I could think when I read this was the colloquial meaning that he was a thief. Represented an employer in an FMLA retaliation claim. The plaintiff had quit, claiming a hostile work environment, then went on and started her own company that more or less competed with my client. In the plaintiff's deposition, the plaintiff went on and on about how sick she was when she went on FMLA leave, and how horribly she was treated by my client. Her new company had a Facebook page. I asked her about it, and had printed out several sections from the page, including photos. She admitted she had posted the photos, and Marizo posted them from her phone moments after they were taken. After I had those admissions on the record, I produced pictures of her touring the facility where her new business was located, smiling and walking with her friends. The date of those photos was while she was on FMLA leave from my client. My client was being sued in China. We decided to sue them in US to convince the Chinese judge to dismiss the case so it can be heard in the US. We filed suit, and we got the other side to accept service. During the Chinese court hearing, the opposition wanted to have the Chinese court hear the case, but Chinese lawyers got shut down because they signed for the service in the US, implying that the US court is the proper jurisdiction and venue. Told this story a few years back, but everything old is new again. My brother is a divorce attorney. His most memorable case, he was representing a guy in a divorce custody battle who was accused of horrific child abuse. Very graphic, very detailed depositions from the young kids against daddy. Things look grim. Then my brother notices the deposition transcript, done by social workers under oath, contains a question at the end from one of the kids. Did I hit my marks? My brother had previously tried to make it as an actor in Hollywood right out of high school, failing miserably, and decided to go into law. And altogether subpoenas the wife's personal checking account during discovery. Sure enough, acting lessons. Deposes an extremely sketchy acting coach, and panics. Coach quickly coughs up DVDs of practice interrogations with the kids, hours of coaching the kids on exactly what imaginary things to say about daddy. He says it was his one and only Perry Mason moment in 20 plus years of practice, and dad got sole custody of the kids. Holy crap. Fake accusations of serious crimes make my blood boil. The wife could have put her ex in prison for years over something he didn't do. Not my story, but a mentor's. He worked in personal injury and accidents. The accident was between two very expensive cars, his clients being new and the opposing sides being a vintage collectible. The case was only in regards to damages and what each side owed each other. The opposing side tried to claim the paint damage on the front where there was a collision, claiming that the cost of the paint job was no longer made and had to be custom made, mixed, and applied especially, and made a big deal over paint. My mentor had the keen eyesight and pointed out if the paint was damaged, where were the paint chips, as they were missing yet not on the ground or embedded in his client's obviously contrasting car. This was brought up in cross, and was met with a dumbfounded look and quiet. This bore a huge hole in the credibility of the opposing counsel and eventually led to the very expensive case going in his favor. I had a middle-aged client who was arrested for a DUI based solely off of the testimony of his stepdad and the neighbors. My client was arrested in his house sleeping on the bed for drunk driving. No police officers saw him driving, no FSTs were conducted, and no back was recorded. The stepdad had a falling out with the guy and was really pushing the DA's office to press charges. Like really pushing it. For whatever reason they took it to trial. Some backstory to this, my client was about 5 feet 5 and close to 350 pounds. I am about as opposite as I can be from him. Completely different color hair, height, build, etc. State calls their first witness and asks them to identify who they saw driving drunk the day my client was arrested. The witness pointed to me. Yes, me. The guy in the suit and definitely not a short fat guy in a tank top and shorts. The re-asked the question and got the same answer. Needless to say, direct didn't last very long. State brought on a second witness, the wife of the first witness. Asked them to identify the person they saw driving intoxicated. Again, the witness points to me. I had to stifle a laugh. It was hilarious. The dude kind of pushes back asking questions like, are you sure that is who you saw? Have you ever seen them before? And the woman started going on and on and on saying things like, I see him all the time getting the mail. And of course I know it is him because he is so tall I always have to look up to talk to him when I stood up for cross. She spoke to me as if I was the defendant. Even going so far as to say shame on you for driving drunk in our neighborhood, sheesh. State calls the third witness and asks them to identify the defendant. The third, completely unrelated witness identified me again as the defendant. So, at this point, the state had no offered any back, FSTs, no police observations, and only 3 witnesses that had identified the wrong defendant when they had a 50% chance of guessing who was the defendant. So yeah, it was really 3 gotcha moments, but the gotcha-ness of each statement crescendoing to bigger and better gotcha-s. The DA's office where I was at during that trial was very reasonable and fair. I think I just got stuck with a badder. They let her go shortly after that for unrelated things. Well, I hope you got the book thrown at you for drunk driving. Shame on you. Not me but a coworker. So our client was an employee of this trucking company. The contractual agreement stated that the employer had to base the pay of the employee on the data the truck's computer provided, and after the employer could add any corrections he saw fit. The employer provided a statement how the pay was calculated. The employee then had 3 months to object to the calculation. If he didn't, the statement stood and wasn't easily to dispute anymore. So our client claimed his salary was calculated wrongly, yet he couldn't prove he had objected. Our client said he did and the employer said he didn't. Tough freaking luck for our client as it was basically a losing case. So then came the closing statements. The employee has the second to last word and said, although I cannot prove it, know that I am telling the truth and I did object. Then it was the employer's turn to speak. To the surprise of all present he said, and I'm paraphrasing, I'm so sick and tired of seeing this employee and his constant and incessant whining about his payslip. Our client won. I was a witness at a hearing on some counterfeit aircraft parts. The lawyer for the German company that supplied them told us that there was a delay and that the hearing had to be rescheduled. The magistrate in charge said now, not later. Turns out that the German guy who said he was the owner of said company was bogus and he was Canadian and that the real owner of the company had died at a hospital in London 2 days earlier. Oops, they caught dude trying to get into Canada about a week later. Former insurance lawyer. There were quite a few times I've busted someone for faking a disability by hiring private investigators to tail them for a day. One guy claimed he could barely walk or move at all. Like couldn't even make himself breakfast or get out of bed without help. Caught him literally jogging out of his independent medical examination for the purpose of litigation and threw his walker aside when he bent down to pick up his keys after dropping them. I work fraud investigations now and it never ceases to amaze me how people think they're exceptional liars. Not my story but a friend's parent, FP, told me this one. FP works as a lawyer for an insurance company. A man got a coverage claim for his new Bugatti that would compensate him $2.20 million more than the car was worth in the case of an accident. This man was driving his Bugatti near a lake somewhere, Texas I think, when all of a sudden, his car took a turn into it. Before this happened, however, teenagers were filming this very expensive car, as it was interesting. They filmed everything that happened. When the man got back home he said that a bird had flew in his windshield. The insurance company had no evidence to prove him wrong and they were frantically trying to figure something out. That's when the teenagers offered the video, as the story had made the news. The video had shown that no bird had flew in front of him, and the case was resolved. The guy got charged with insurance fraud. TLDR. Some guy committed insurance fraud while kids were filming. One of my close friends in law school went on to work at a small but very prestigious litigation firm. The kind where everyone works 80+ hours a week, drives expensive cars and wears suits. On the other hand, I practiced estate planning and I tended to wear jeans and I drove the car I had in college. I had closed down my solo practice since I was moving for my husband's job and my friend hired me on part-time to help train new law clerks on how to use legal software. It was a mix of glorified IT work combined with babysitting law students. I mostly took the job as a favor to her since she was juggling multiple cases at the moment and it gave me something to do for the 2 months until the move. To say the least, I was not going to run out and buy a bunch of suits for the position, so I continued my jeans look. About 3 weeks and I am in the elevator and I am joined by 2 men. One clearly is a lawyer while the other is his client. The client asks the lawyer, "Do we need to tell them about the deleted emails in the backup server?" Lawyer responds with, "No, whatever you do don't mention it. Lie if you have to but don't mention it at all." We all get off on the same floor and they walk into one of the meeting rooms. I go into my friend's office and tell her to ask them about the deleted emails and the backup server. Apparently the deposition was epic. The client cracked like an egg the second it was asked and spilled everything. Not me, but my husband, who is an attorney. He was on a work comp case, and the defendant claimed he had a work injury that made him unable to walk, lift over 1 pound, basically do any functions of daily life, asking for a lot of $sign of my husband's client. My husband's paralegal did a bit of investigating and found photos of him dated 1 week before the deposition, sledding in the snow, walking up hills, throwing snowballs, etc. My husband went through all of the basic depo questions, asking about how debilitated this person was, including a sprinkling of questions asking if he could no longer transit without a wheelchair, throw anything, certainly couldn't walk up a hill. To which the client said, under oath, that would be impossible. Then, he revealed the photos, made publicly on Facebook for anyone to see. He asked if that was him, if it was the correct date, etc. The opposing attorney apparently looked appalled, spoke with his client in private for a moment, and they withdrew. Probably getting buried, but when I was just starting out I sat in on a workers' comp deposition to get a feel for it. There was a woman who claimed she lost use of her shoulder after slipping and falling at work. The attorney asks her very general questions about her range of motion and weight carrying ability. Think like, can you lift your arm above your head? Can you lift 5 pounds above your shoulder? She swore she had very limited range of motion, 30 degrees less than shoulder height, and could lift absolutely no weight on her right side. The lawyer's questions got more specific. Can you throw a trash bag into a bin? No, she says. Can you lift a lamp over your head? She looks at her attorney like she's trying to figure out what's going on. Can you wash a 1999 Toyota 4Runner while standing on the running board? She starts yelling at her attorney in her native language. Turns out, we had a pie observe her Sunday chores from a public park across the street. She took out the trash, picked up a lamp someone else had thrown away, then washed her car. Case settled for $200 at the deposition. Not a lawyer, but involved in fraud investigations. Called a suspect who was allegedly using the money he was being provided as guardian for an incapable individual. I explained the allegation. He stated, "Yeah, they're correct. I took the lump sum and bought C and booze. I understand it was wrong. Do what you gotta, so I'll sign a statement or come in the office if you need me to. Not really dealing with higher level criminals here. People are people. They weren't trying to fill a bad guy role. It's got to be a terrible life. hating yourself inside, or they just really hoped they wouldn't be caught, and had already known that all they'd be able to do if they were was to shrug. Work in family law. Client insisted the employee his wife claimed was their family assistant was his wife's personal assistant. He had nothing to do with her, and all of her payroll should be allocated to his wife. Opposing attorneys show up with an email from client to family assistant saying in future dinners, when broccoli is served, I require a higher flow rate to stem ratio. Payroll got allocated to the community and we consistently joke about florets. This was before I went to law school, but while I was working for a defense attorney. It's a longish story. His client owned a very spacious auto shop. He would offer homeless men menial jobs and actually let them stay at the shop overnight. There was a loft area with bedding and everything, so it was kind of a nice deal for them. Make some money. He stocks the fridge with some food for them and everything. Gives them a roof over their heads and a bed to sleep on. Turns out he was also kind of forcing them to have sex with him and with each other. Prosecutors charge the guy with felony pandering, which means pimping, to force, induce, entice or inveigle a person to become a prostitute. There were close to a dozen men that came forward and said they'd gone through this with the defendant over the course of about a year. Defense attorney spends a lot of time reviewing the pandering statute and notices that the statute was amended not long ago in a material way. He keeps it to himself. They go to the prelim. Defense counsel is crossing the victims, focusing very much on the timeline. When was the first time this happened to you? When was the last? He's marking the dates on a whiteboard. After everyone has spoken, he gets up with his whiteboard and draws a long, dividing line after all of those dates. This line, he says, represents when the pandering statute was changed from A to B. New whiteboard. A person who does any of the following is guilty of a felony punishable by imprisonment for not more than 20 years. B. Induces, persuades, encourages, inveigles, or entices a female to become a prostitute. B. A person who does any of the following is guilty of a felony punishable by imprisonment for not more than 20 years. B. Induces, persuades, encourages, inveigles, or entices a person to become a prostitute. There were 0 female victims. At the time the alleged crime was committed, it was not illegal to induce, persuade, encourage, inveigle or entice a male to become a prostitute. They failed to bind him over on the pandering charges. They recharged him with something else and I think he ended up going in for 10 on that. What a scumbag. I hope it's okay to do this on by proxy. Uncle is a lawyer and this is one of his favorite ones, though I know I can't do it justice. Defendant was pulled over, small town in the south, accused of DUI, and came to my uncle because afterwards evidence surfaced of there being open containers. He of course maintained his innocence. Well, it was later found out this evidence was Budweiser containers, cans or bottles, I can't recall. Thing is, this was not long after Budweiser had started their Born on Date campaign, and the evidence was born after the date the defendant was pulled over. Suffice to say the case fell apart after that. Not me, but my cousin. He's an intellectual property lawyer who lives in the Bay Area and represents lots of small artists and craftspeople. One day, one of his clients is wandering through the aisles of a major home decor chain store. She notices a bowl that looks exactly like one of her bowls. Ultimately, she and my cousin sue the chain store. The store denies everything. My cousin buys a bunch of the suspect bowls and has them sent to a lab where they do a series of scans. What they discovered guaranteed victory for my cousin's client. The company had stolen her design. The proof was that when they copied the original bowl, when they made the mold, they accidentally included her fingerprint, which meant that every bowl that they sold literally had her fingerprints all over them. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.